Hello everyone. In a previous episode, we saw how Spain's Charles V attempted to revive the Roman Empire by drawing on his Habsburg and Spanish lineages. But it's important to note that he did not mean the pagan Roman Empire, but rather he meant the Christianized Roman Empire of none other than Constantine the Great. Now, in Constantine's day, you had the Roman Empire divided up as a means to make the empire easier to rule. And this brings us to one of many of Rome's civil wars, particularly between Constantine and his rival, Maxentius. Although dividing the empire up was a means to preserve Rome, it only served in many cases to drive conflict. Now, depending on which legend or history you are reading, there's different versions of what happens next. According to one legend, as Constantine prepared to go into war, he decided first to pray. Falling into a trance, he experienced a vision. Apparently, he saw the crucifix shining in heaven, burning in a brilliant radiance. Angels then appeared next to him, saying, quote, "Constantine, by this conquer." He then marked on his forehead the same exact sign he saw in the sky. Furthermore, he ordered his troops to do the same, to also make the sign of the cross on their shields before they go into battle. Constantine and Maxentius clashed. As Maxentius's forces fled from Constantine's might, he crossed a bridge where, in a haste to leave, he fell overboard, and weighed down by his heavy armor, he drowned. Such a victory was seen as a divine miracle that Constantine was chosen by God, and Christianity was God's preferred faith, that is preferred over the pagan polytheism of the Romans. In the wake of his victory, Constantine sought to unify the Roman Empire, not only behind a single ruler, but also behind a single faith. In his decriminalization of Christianity, Constantine united church and state. Christian Rome conquered pagan Rome. In this regard, some may come to the conclusion that Christian Rome was superior to pagan Rome, because pagan Rome was a political entity. It had troops, it had rulers, it had borders. Christian Rome knew none of these things. Constantine's Christianization of pagan Rome meant that Rome was elevated from a mere political entity with a fixed beginning and a fixed end to a metaphysical force, a spiritual force that is essentially timeless. Christianizing political Rome meant that the Christian Roman Empire was no longer solely in the realm of politics. It was now a cultural movement, a way of looking at the world. A Christian Rome existing in the realm of ideas, existing in the realm of culture, meant that it would outlive its rulers, triumph over any troops, and survive the fall of any political entities. The pagan Roman Empire talked about being borderless and universal, where the Christian Roman Empire actually didn't care about borders and truly sought to convert everyone across the world. Ideas are eternal, and Constantine's Christianization of the Roman Empire, transforming it into the Christian Roman Empire, also meant that the spiritual Christian Rome would also be eternal. That Rome, specifically Christian Rome, would survive the dissolution of its borders, survive the fall of its institutions, and survive the dethronement and usurpation of its rulers. Christian Rome not only engulfed pagan Rome, Christian Rome also superseded pagan Rome. Christian Rome built upon the cosmopolitan, borderless outlook of pagan Rome and supercharged it. Accordingly, Christian Rome would succeed where pagan Rome failed. The Spanish would guarantee that. Historians have characterized Constantine's Christianization of Rome as wedding the cross and the sword, of combining the idea of spreading Christianity to the idea of violently imposing Christianity on peoples around the world. This tradition of the cross and the sword would be revived by Spain as it's beginning its so-called age of discovery. Like Constantine, as we have seen, Spain's monarchs also attempted to enforce Christian unity in its realms. This was the basis of the Holy Inquisition that terrorized peoples. This was the basis of essentially wiping out many elements of Mexica culture. However, Spain did not take Roman ideas in their pure form. In the centuries between the fall of the western provinces of Rome and the rise of the Spanish Empire, Roman ideas underwent substantial transformations. To give one example, during the times of pagan Rome, many pagan Romans believed that their pagan empire ascended to become the world empire of humanity because of their beliefs, that they were an exceptionally virtuous people who supposedly had a unique moral culture. The Romans ascended into the role of world imperials because they had self-discipline, they had grit, they had the proper outlook which would guarantee this sort of ascendancy. And many Romans believed that this world champion mentality was based on their belief in pietas, the origin of our modern English word of piety, though they mean different things. Now, the ancient Roman poet Virgil is an example of this. He attributed the rise of Rome to being, quote, outstanding in arms and piety. Now, for the pagan Romans, pietas denoted loyalty to the family, and more generally, loyalty to one's community and society, along with the observation of the community's pagan religious beliefs. According to Cicero, Rome had prospered chiefly because of, quote, our scrupulous attention to religion and our wise grasp of a single truth. And for the pagan Romans, piety was the expression of virtue. And virtue was the willingness to die for one's beliefs, was willing to die for the beliefs of the community. Virtue was the recognition that the greater good of society triumphed and was more important than your own individual self-interest. Virtue recognized that the individual is important, yes, but is nothing compared to the greater good of society. Now, this was pagan piety, pagan virtue, pagan worship, pagan spirituality. And honestly, the translation from pagan ideas of virtue to Christian ideas of virtue was extremely easy for many of the newly Christianized Romans to make. Once Christianity ascends to become the official religion of the Roman Empire, being Christian and being Roman are synonymous. They're exactly the same. To be a Roman meant that you were also a Christian, and to be a Christian meant that you were also a Roman. Consequently, barbarians are no longer simply uncivilized people. They are non-Christian people. They are pagans. Another example of the transformation classical ideas had is the example of rhetoric. That is the art of public speaking. For Roman statesmen such as Cicero, rhetoric was the defining feature of a civilized and urban society. It was a cultural infrastructure, every bit as real as the more corporeal types of infrastructure, such as roads and aqueducts. Cicero believed that societies only existed because the eloquence of their own speakers to essentially guide society's members. And after the fall of the Western provinces, rhetoric continued to be taught, but it had been heavily Christianized throughout the ages. Rhetoric was no longer simply to guide public opinion, to sway the masses. It was supposed to be used to guide public opinion and to guide the masses toward more Christian ways of living. Throughout the centuries, oration also came to mean prayer. Moreover, the Greco-Roman Stoic basis of Roman Cosmopolitanism was also transformed by Christianity. As we have seen in a previous episode, Christianity had its own indigenous tradition of intercultural acceptance. You had the Apostle Paul write, quote, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Christian Rome combined both these cosmopolitan outlooks, the cosmopolitan outlook of the Greco-Roman Stoic international world empire and the missionarization activities of the early Christian church, that is to spread the word of God. Christian Rome harnessed both these traditions, drew upon both these traditions, and in essence supercharged both these traditions. From the society of the civilized versus the uncivilized, you have now the society of the Christian versus the non-Christian. And indeed, Christian Rome was heavily inspired through pagan Rome. That is the idea of a community of world citizens united in a single faith, around a single unifying culture. And just as how the pagan Romans divided civilized behaviors from uncivilized behaviors, the Christian Romans did exactly the same thing. They had what was known as the correct moral way of living versus the incorrect and sinful way of living. Christian Rome divided humanity up into true believers and those non-Christians who are sinful. For Stoic Romans, the incorrect way of living was a way of living in which you did not live up to your full human potential. For Christian Romans, the incorrect way of living was not living up to your potential as God intended it. That is, your highest potential as a human being, as an individual, was only in serving to make God's kingdom a reality. And in many ways, Christian Rome simply built upon the pre-existing traditions that they had inherited. In another example from the poet Virgil, he said that Jupiter gave to the Romans an empire without limits, without time, saying, quote, "For these Romans I set neither bounds nor periods of empire. Imperium without end I give." And just as how the pagan Romans and the Christian Romans believed in a single unifying empire, a single unifying culture for everyone, the Spanish revived this tradition under Charles V at the beginning of the Age of Discovery. They believed it was now Spain's mission to continue where Rome left off, where Rome had failed. They believed that the Spanish Empire should take up the world imperial project which Rome had begun. Indeed, as we have seen, Charles V tapped into this legacy. He portrayed himself as the shepherd of Christianity, a shepherd for all the flocks of the world. As the crowned prince of Christendom, he believed it was his duty to protect Christianity and to spread Christianity, to join the cross and the sword. And in this regard, Charles V was supported by a whole range of propagandists, from court historiographers to visual artists. His Grand Chancellor argued that his role as the emperor of both the Habsburg throne and the Spanish throne meant that he was chosen to complete Rome's world project. His Grand Chancellor argued that Charles V was God's chosen one, was God's chosen instrument to unite humanity, to unify humanity. It was for these reasons that the prophecy of the last world emperor, which we have previously explored, was once again brought up and now attached to the reign of Charles V. It was he who was a true last world emperor. And accordingly, the prophecy held that the last world emperor was an emperor who united the world's peoples in a single nation, under a single faith, Christianity. And once humanity was finally unified, the Antichrist would appear and usher in the apocalypse, the end of the world. And indeed, this project of unifying all the people in the world under a single world empire underwrote Spanish imperialism. The Spanish Empire took the Roman Empire's imperial world project and made it their own. Rome's quest to unify the world under a single empire became Spain's own quest to unify the world under a single empire. And according to Charles V and the other Spanish propagandists, this was not all done to enrich themselves and to empower themselves politically and militarily. No, according to them, they were laying the foundation for everlasting world peace. They were paving the way for heaven on earth, because once the prophecy of the last world emperor was fulfilled, then Christ would return. And once Christ returned, all the world's suffering would end. The world would finally know peace. The world would finally know happiness. And this is how Spain characterized their drive for a global empire, as an attempt to create heaven on earth, as an attempt to bring heaven from some abstract realm of ideas into reality.